So, we're about to hear your first piece of music, which is Peppers and Tomatoes by Ralph McTell. Have I got that right?
You have indeed.
Why have you chosen that?
Well, one, Ralph's an old mate. We were at college together, and but two, why it's particularly relevant at this time, as will become obvious from the song. He wrote it during the Yugoslav wars, and when communities that had lived together for decades suddenly started fighting, and this is just, but it applies, I think, to very much a lot of situations that are going on now around the world.
Thank you. So, Andrew, if we can listen to that, please. So, is there anything else you'd like to say about that choice of music before we move on?
Well, apart from the fact that the inspiration for it was a vegetable truck was passing by and it had peppers and tomatoes on the side, and he was thinking that they use the same piece of earth, but they're completely different, and that for him became a symbol. And I think, given the number of people that are having to move at the moment.
Okay. Now, most of you know here, I'm definitely a person of faith. When I got baptised as a 14-year-old, his reaction was, well, it's safer than heroin. And on that, though, you can see that he's not a person of faith from that reply. But he has taught me more about social justice and equality and inclusion and actually living out what the Bible means than most of the churches I've been part of. And so I'm interested to know, where did your value system come from and how do you explain it, bearing in mind you don't use faith as an explanation?
I think it comes, I promise not to take the whole 20 minutes on this question, but I think it starts from childhood. My parents, who I never agreed with politically, but my mother as a service wife, my dad was in the Navy, my mother as a service wife did a lot of voluntary work. So I watched her doing voluntary work right through the time. And my dad being service had, there was right and wrong and fair play and all that sort of thing. So that was sort of ingrained more than I thought, in fact. And then part of my disagreement with him, I kind of left home and met a wonderful character called Alec Dixon, who started Community Service Volunteers. Well, he'd started VSO, voluntary service overseas, and he went to America to help him set up the Peace Corps. He came back and found his own organisation had sacked him because he wasn't an administrator. So he went into a 2-year depression and suddenly woke up and thought, there are deserts at home. He was very Eton and ex-Guards. And so I, as a runaway, went into his office. Well, I went into VSO, and in those times, well, one, I was only 17, you had to be 18 to volunteer, and two, it was very much an ex-public school then organisation. They said, well, there's CSB down the road. Well, it's in the East End. It was a lot more down the road. And I wondered, and I met Alex himself, and he had this absolute value of youth as that they should take the lead. And one of the places I was sent was a home for teenagers with physical disabilities in Bognor Regis. And there was a radical Presbyterian preacher down there who ran it, who got sacked from his local church because he was on that kind of, and there were no there was no rights for people with disabilities in those days. So this is back in the 60s. And so he'd do things like take a wheelchair into the local cinema, block the aisle, and they'd say, but it's a fire risk. He'll say, well, call the police then, and I'll get it in the papers. And so there was and all sorts of stuff like that. So, and we went to the Tate Gallery with this guy in the 20 stone in a wheelchair, and no way could we get him up the steps in the front of the Tate. And he walked up there. He would never take no. And so he said, how do you get those big paintings in? They said, well, there's a goods lift around the corner. He said, I'll be there in 2 minutes. Be there. and we'd go and visit cathedrals that had medieval paintings in, and there'd be bits roped off that only bishops could go to. And he'd throw these aside and said, I don't believe in a hierarchical church. So we'd poke through, go around with wheelchairs. So I think he was quite influential.
Okay, thank you. And so you're a poet and storyteller. I mean, when I was growing up, you were young, you were a poet.
Yeah.
And then you became a peddler for a summer and was walking around East Anglia in character. And it seemed when you came back from that, you're a storyteller. How have you used your art for social justice and helping give people who don't have a voice, actually having their voices heard and brought in from the margins?
Well, the poetry started there. It was sort of radical. Then it was much more radical. We go on between bands, that's where Barry first saw me. Was sitting there between two punk bands and on a John Peel roadshow, and just trying to do poetry. And it was fun. Covered in God by the time I got off the stage, but there's some little guy came up to me and said, can I have an interview if I fancy? But more recently, I've been running a website called World Storytelling Cafe. And on Tuesdays, we're having a bit of a break at the moment, we had young international storytellers, which was kids from any place in the world could come in and tell stories. And amongst the children that turned up sometimes when they could get the internet were children from Gaza. We had kids from Punjab, from Nigeria, but sometimes they'd come on with their teachers and they'd tell stories. And it was before, I mean, it's impossible at the moment, obviously, but there was a moment where a teacher was apologized for her kids not being able to come that time there, but she said, the bombs are falling and all the windows are, and you could hear it outside. And I'm trying to, I'm on the screen and trying not to cry while this is going on. So that's, but before that, there's a bit of an important bit I've missed there, which is I was the first storyteller in residence in the British prison, and which of course the press made fun of. We had a particularly famous prisoner with us, and so the headline in the Sun was Jack Cray Norrie. And within that, although it started, the big official charity started 2 years later, started by someone else, Sharon. I was one of the first people doing storybook dads. I think that's why they got me in there. And then, so that was prisoners recording their own stories to send back to their children. And on those days, it was just on little cassette tapes, and I'd get demo tapes and put sellotape over them because they were exactly the right length, and re-record over the top. So the whole prison, and then I just became, we wrote plays, we did everything, but everything started from a story. And there was a wonderful moment where I brought Duncan Williamson as an old traveller storyteller in, and only 6 people came to the session, and I thought, complete disaster. 3 months later, I heard the stories he'd told that, and they'd gone all around the prison. He was an amusing character. I mean, as we were going out.
Okay, we are time limited.
I was going to a story. Carry on.
No. You carry on.
Right now, back to the World Storytelling Cafe. So we had all these stories from children from Gaza, and what's happening now is that it's not on our site, but a lot of the storytellers that have been on the site, the international storytellers, have each taken one of those stories that they've heard from the children, and they've put them out again. There's been a whole series of these stories, and a Palestinian teacher who's in this country but was split up from her family was asked, well, what good, I mean, the people who were organising this, so what good has it done? She said, it's because people will know we're thinking of them, and they're not just war victims, they've all done the story, so, so, you know, it's a little thing, but, you know.
Okay, and we've jumped quite a bit there in bits of your life, and there's certain bits I want
That
to...
you can't say in church. No, sorry.
Yeah, look, we're not going into the fact you're a hedonist. We're focusing on the social justice part. In terms of social justice, I was very clear growing up that racial justice was really important to you. So could you tell us a bit about why that was so important to you, not just in this country, but working towards the end of apartheid in South Africa? Because I know you took me on demos and taught me to look at where my fruit came from. And Mum would go mad when both of us got into ethical consumerism and we're sort of saying, no, we can't eat that. So where did that kind of racial justice side come in for you?
Music. When I was at school, there was a whole jazz boom and then blues, and then I gradually started reading Black American literature, and I took a book out of Broadstairs Library when I was with CSB, and it said Blues People, Leroy Jones, and I thought, oh, it's a book about blues, and in fact it was a book about the American South, and I think that, and the whole civil rights thing is going on at the same time, but no one is looking at what's happening in this country. And gradually, and then I started managing reggae bands, and it became obvious what was happening. We'd get stopped by the police, and they'd be talking to me all white up the front, very rationally. Meanwhile, they're in the back of the band, searching the band, and giving the band at the back a completely different thing than what was going on. So had anyone asked me, I'd say, oh no, they're perfectly nice. Meanwhile, all these up there, even the jack plugs are paid for. So I became more and more aware. And at the same time, there's the rise of the National Front, and which last piece of musical addresses. In fact, I had the band up in Sunderland, which we were told that was particularly, we were the first black band to play Sunderland, and we were warned it would be difficult. And my guitarist said, first of all, we play Ku Klux Klan, and then we play Siamacom. And so that whole, and you became more and more aware of almost that hidden racism that was going on. And the more I traveled and my American friends would say, you don't understand racism until you've been to America. And I'd been to Texas, I'd seen a bit there, but it didn't seem much different here. I went to where he lived in St. Louis, and they had that on the low rise, the low flats, they had the numbers on the roofs, so the police helicopters could see, and you just saw that, because that's on that cut, that's a border area between north and south, and it just became starkly obvious. And the more I've travelled, the more I understand. You know, when coming into from Texas from Mexico, they're saying, is everyone British citizens? And the preacher who's gone running it says, yes. I thought, oh, great, I've got God lying for me. And but they're not looking at me. I'm looking all white and hillbilly up the back. They're looking at the Hispanic students that have probably lived in America for generations. And you really understand, you know, that anyone who claims white privilege doesn't exist is fooling themselves, really, because the more you travel, I can go to Morocco anytime I want. I'll run a festival in Morocco. I can't bring Moroccans here. You know, it's just,
Okay, and I know we're going to get to questions in a moment and listen to your second bit of music after that, but I have a sort of another area I'm really interested in, because detached youth and making sure that young people were given opportunities rather than written off, and using the arts as part of that has been an important part of your life as long as I can remember. And what's the most significant aspect you think people can do to actually support young people having opportunities?
Well, she drops these questions on me that I should take half an hour to think about. I mean, I think, first of all, do it in their own spaces. It's no good inviting young people to a space they don't go to. So when I was a detached youth worker, I was actually working on the street with the thing of continually arguing with constables who wanted to move them on. And then they got invited to a meeting, but it was in someone else's place. And so I said, that ain't going to work. Only one person turned up, and I think that was because it was part of their probation and their probation officer. So I said, so we met on the park on the open space, and I got 6 councillors down there, and we had meeting with the council and so forth. And it's like what they want, and what they wanted was a basketball court, and it never worked out. In the end, because of the obstructions, you must have found this when you try and do any work, that everyone's supportive until that last moment, and then they find a lot of excuses why it's not going to happen. So I pulled the young people. I said, I'm leaving this meeting, you can stay if you want. And all the kids came away with me, and I obviously got in a lot of trouble for that. And I said, well, like, if you want to teach real politics, teach real politics. If you'd been in a union negotiation, if nothing was put on the table, you'd leave the table. And kids have to learn to not just break stuff up, but stand up for themselves as well. And I think, but it's that use of space. That wasn't a very arty question, arty answer.
No, but actually, in terms of the power of going to where people are, is a really important aspect of that. Dawn, do you want to take the microphone to see if there's any questions at this point? Because I'm aware we've had our 20 minutes.
No, you're fine. Thank you. I actually want to ask a question first of all. Obviously, I'm really curious as to why a story is so important. Why sharing our worldwide story is so important.
It's probably the reason we're still here. I know Neanderthals didn't die out, we're all a bit Neanderthal, but when Homo sapiens and Neanderthals just shared a space, probably they didn't have stories and Homo sapiens did, so it's to do with memory. So the food's run out, and someone says, my granny told me if I'd go across 2 mountains, walk 3 moons and 5 forests, I can get to a lake, and that lake is full of fish. And so it's to do with survival. And the more we tell stories, the more we realize there's the commonality. It's a cliche, there's more that unites us and divides us. But if you look at the whole smorgasbord of world stories, you realize just how true that is. For instance, there's over 300 versions of Cinderella. I used to think the first came from ancient China from about 600 AD, but now I've since discovered there's one from ancient Egypt from about 24 BC. And you could really take all stories from that. But you see the cultural differences as well. And of course, that's a generalization, because there are stories that are quite specific to people, and you have to be careful about sort of respecting other cultures. So that's the whole issue within storytelling is.
That's absolutely fascinating, and I'm pleased to know that Disney don't own the rights the stories are a lot older than that. That gives me heart. That does. Has anybody got a question that they'd like to ask John? Yes, Juliet.
I wasn't there. It was someone who reminded me like me.
Hello. I'd like to ask you, what has motivated you most, looking back on my life, what has motivated you most, especially thinking of just getting justice to people? Was there any one particular thing, or is it a combination?
I think it was my head teacher saying I was going to be a complete failure. But also that experience, bullying and that sort of thing, and that if you're marginalised in any way, I think that's a big motive, and because you see the gaps, and then you can apply those gaps wherever you go. So it doesn't matter, you could be the little rich girl that the parents ignored totally and was left with the nanny. She will see certain things, she'll either replicate that or go the other way and see what the gaps are. So wherever you are, you can see the gaps.
So you feel everyone has a moral duty to fight for justice?
I don't know. I mean, I could go along with that free will thing, but yeah, it would be handy. It'd be very nice if they did. It would be, if they don't want to be put in a line and shot come the revolution. Oh, goodness.
Anybody else have any questions? What's it? It's fun silence. I'm sure there's something that some of you would really like to know. Yeah, go on.
It's all women, isn't it? It's great.
I loved hearing about him, and I was concentrating so much on the I may have missed, were you a folk singer, Emma?
No, that's the reason I'm a storyteller, is that I can't hold a note. But I work, when I'm gigging, I do a lot of folk festivals. I run a storytelling area at Cambridge Folk Festival and a lot of folk festivals. And Ralph, we used to go to folk clubs around South London, around Croydon, when Ralph was young. And so if Ralph was on, we'd go and see him because he was a mate of a mate, all that.
Anybody else?
All the men are really silent, aren't they? It's like...
Yes, Alan.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Thank you for sharing that.
And thank you for your bacon sandwich, Ellie.
Sally was very open about the fact that you come from a folk stroke radical background but don't have faith. Have you and Sally, as you've grown, she's talked about the influence you've had on her. What's her influence been on you?
Well, I think well, I think partly it's made me more open towards, I was very, because of being forced to go to church and that sort of thing, and that the whole side of Christianity has got a very bad reputation. And I was seeing it as something that divides people, and, I was looking at religious wars and things, so I was really anti. I think that as you were growing up, I went to a carol service and said, like, why would we want to celebrate the slaughter of children, the Herod thing? But partly because I went to support, I'd go along to baptism. I also argued with the preachers. There was one that had some American evangelists in, and they showed Africa being African traditional religions as being heathen, and that sort of, it was almost 1930s, the film they showed, and much too. Actually, I asked Sally first and said, do you mind if I go and confront the preacher on this? And she said, please do. But then through that and the prison work, because the chaplaincy in prisons is really important. It's the only place that can go anywhere. And of course, the chapel has the best acoustics. So I had to convince every a managing chaplain in every prison I worked in, that the chapel was a theatre that I lent them for religious purposes. But I met people from all religions, and I saw a lot of good work that was going on. Wouldn't go you know, and so the practical side. But I think Sally's influence as, and that's a long answer to the question, has made me more open to the positive side of all religions.
Anybody else got a question? I think I speak on behalf of everybody actually, John. Just how amazing. I mean, firstly, what an amazing life that you've got, and the things that you do, and your outlook and everything. I grew up in East Anglia as well, so I'm quite, you know, we have peculiar customs in East Anglia, one would say.
Superior.
Peculiar. I was a minister when I very first started as a youth worker. I was in Whittlesea, just on the outskirts of Peterborough, and they're the only town locally that I know of that have the Straw Bear Festival. And again, a lot of storytellers, Molly dancers, very peculiarly Fenland, a ritual basically. It is a ritual, you know, and it's a bit of a cock roll, which is not too bad, I think. But yeah, I think. Do you think your surroundings growing up? I mean, you grew up did you grow up in the East End, or did you grow up sort of?
No, I grew up in Harlow Newtown, of all things,
Right.
which had an effect on me in terms of thinking public art was important, because it's now called the Sculpture Town. But you know, they put all the sculptures in museums. The Henry Moore I passed on the way to work to school. You know, they put them in museums so they don't get damaged. So Henry Moore, before it was unveiled, had the baby's nose knocked off of the family group. But I thought public art and arts in general were a normal part of existence. And it was just that post-war brave new world of the new towns. And I moved up to East Anglia when I was about 16, and then spent about 30 odd years there, longer. So I think East Anglia's had the biggest effect on me.
Yes.
So
it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's actually not a region that people really talk about in terms of, you know, you very firm supporters from the northeast, from Wales, from Cumbria, and every region seems to have quite a strong, or some regions seem to have a very strong identity, don't they? Where East Anglia, I often feel, is a bit benign and a bit, you know, or they're a bit countryside, and they don't, you know, and all of this. But it is a wealth of understanding and of living with differences. And that was where I was going with it. Because do you think part of East Anglia's wealth in its stories and everything is because they have been invading so many towns, and it's such a mishmash of cultures in that particular area?
yeah, the Norwich Library ran a thing called People Who Came. And of course, the last people that came were the American servicemen. And so when I was running the bands, there'd be always people moving around, and they were a strong part of the town. And of course, because the town had a Caribbean population as well, there was a lot of mix between African American and the Caribbean community. So, but I think beyond that, there was the fact that there was cheap housing. So, which was one reason why we had wages were low, but there was housing in Ipswich. So there was a movement from London. That London jazz scene came up. A lot of movement from London. So the cultures mixed, which produced the East Anglian fairs. People come up from London. They were all influenced by the happening movement in New York, and then there were the old Gypsy horse fairs. So the two together came together to form the East Anglian fairs. I think that, and that's why it could only have happened in East Anglia. And it's also had a really hidden history of the arts.
Just one more. I'll just so I don't know if somebody's going to answer this about challenging us. Were
No,
you?
go ahead.
Go ahead. So before we say, and I'll let somebody do the rest of that about the music. What would be your challenge to us? To what we could do for justice, to speak out, to what kind of things do you think are the ways in which we could get involved in justice movements?
That's I feel really pretentious after this. I'm gonna say I interviewed Hugh Masekela, who is a South African trumpeter on his Sounds of Freedom tour, and he was Mandela's sort of personal musician in exile, and we'd won apparently the anti-apartheid battle, and during the anti-apartheid movement, we knew we had to boycott Shell and Barclays and all that sort of thing. And I asked Hugh Masekela that same question, and he said, "Well, the other week I was walking through Harlem, and it was like a war zone. I think nothing had changed since slavery." He said, "So all you can do, not all you can do, but the important thing is to see through the smoke screen." And I think seeing through the smoke screen that doesn't sound definite, but I think it's a really important thing to do.
Thank you. Yeah, that is it. And I know, I think you've hit the nail on the head there with that one. Seeing the world as it really is, that's our first duty before we can do it. So thank you. I'll hand back to you.
Can I show off my book?
You can show off your book in a minute.
All right. Well, my publisher really gets at me if I don't do that. So I'll put it back in the bag.
You can do the commercial in a minute, but I'm going to just fill in a couple of bits from what is said that people might find interesting, because the narrative that's been given this morning is somebody who's actually quite purposeful. An awful lot of his life has happened by accident, and you've fallen into things. Could you tell us about the time you were there, how you ended up hearing Harold Macmillan's speech about never had it so good when you were living in Harlow?
Well, I think it was, if you're referring to the time, he was on a walkabout through Harlow, and he was calling it the land of perambulator land. And I'd got my Brownie 127, and so I got between him and the security just as a kid. I was about 10 or 11 years old, taking, like you do, the Prime Minister's visiting, I'll take a few photos. So I was just there in my little shorts and check shirt with my little plastic Brownie 127, click, click, clicking. And
yeah, because I mean, we haven't got time to go into it, but there's been a lot of times in your life, I think it's just, you've happened to be there and only afterwards known it was a significant time or place you were in.
Oh, the Technicolor Dream at Alexandra Palace, for instance.
Well, yeah, all sorts of places. But I think it says something about actually the history story we have about events comes from official narratives. The history I've heard about a number of events has come through, I just happened to be there. And I think it's showing there's two, going back to what you were saying, Dawn, about what do we do, and you were saying about sort of seeing through smoke screens. It's actually the stories we get from the people who are there who don't seem significant in any way, as well as what we hear through the media and through the history books. So it's about whose stories do we listen to on there. Your last piece of music is by Misty and Roots. Could you tell us why you've chosen that?
Well, one, as I mentioned, when I took the reggae band to up north, the guitarist said, when we were about to be placed by racists, we played Sia McComb. but it was also really significant because it's part of that whole, during the sort of Bear Peach times when the police were attacking the people that were fighting the Nazis more than they were attacking the front. And they went in, Misty and Roots were the band, and they were a Southall band, and I thought it was close enough. Yeah. And during a demonstration against the front, they went in and broke up. They went to the community centre where Misty's equipment was being stored, which they used, and police broke up all the equipment. And Malcolm, the manager, was left very injured for a long time. But it was also I was very involved in the Anti-Nazi League. And, you know, in fact, I thought I'd given all that up as street fighting, but I was reminded the other day, we were doing another interview, and the mate we were talking to said when the EDL was there, the current manifestation, I launched myself into them like a silly old ballistic missile. I think was his phrase. But no, we're very active in the Anti-Nazi League, and whether we had any effect or not, but we certainly didn't let them meet anywhere. And this, for me, and when we did Rock Against Racism concerts, you either got Ruts, who were the punk band, or Misty, who were the reggae band. And so this is Sima Come by Misty and Roots.
And I do have to say, when he says he was very involved, he was putting on dances in Ipswich. And one of my memories from being about 6 years old is he saw some members of the National, we were at the local fete in the park, he saw some members of the National Front coming towards him who had given him a kicking and broken his ribs when they'd broken up a dance he'd been running a few weeks before, and just drags me in the other direction going, now. And even at 6 years old, I knew why I was being taken in the other direction. So it wasn't just seeing somebody who went on marches as an influence, it was seeing somebody who actually had the physical impact of standing up for justice there as well. But if we can listen to the song, and then can I ask you to choose one of the poems out your book to do your book advert before I hand back to Dawn. Okay, would you like to do a poem and a book plug?
I'll do. I'm going to do a story that's as short as a poem.
Okay.
And I'll say how I got it. I promise not to keep you here till 1 o'clock. But just after COVID, we ran the first, I helped run the Marrakesh International Storytelling Festival, and the borders have been closed. And they said, are you going to cancel? We said, no, if the borders are open, we're going to do it. And open 5 days before the festival. So we were in every newspaper in North Africa, and sitting in a bus station in Essaouira on the coast was Ishmael. And Ishmael was about to go to his home, little village on the edge of the Sahara, the gateway to the Sahara. And he read about our festival, and he came to the festival. And he told me this story. And I use it with children just to show how stories travel and how they've always traveled. Is people meeting each other and talking to each other. And the only word you want to understand this story is marcouche. Marcouche is a mythical bird. I think it's not even throughout Morocco, it's just in this village or the area of the Sahara. It's a very serious story about a chicken. It's from way back in time. And there was a chicken that built a nest, it laid some eggs. It was just about hatched when she remembered something she hasn't done. Everyone's been in this position. They think they've got everything ready, and at the last moment they remember something. And it'll only take a minute. Nothing can happen in a minute. So she went away, but when she came back, the eggs had hatched. But sitting on her nest was an enormous marcouche. He said, excuse me, do you mind moving aside so I can look after my chicks? And Marcouche said, not at all, if you go to the cow and get me some butter. So she went to the cow and said, excuse me, can I have some butter? I give to the marcouche moves aside, and I can look after my... you've got a BTEC in audience, haven't you? And so the cow said, not at all. If you go to the alfalfa field and get me some alfalfa. I know around here alpha is what hipsters put on their salad, but in that case it's this stuff for cows. And, so she went to the alfalfa field, said, excuse me, could I have some alfalfa to give to the cow? The cow gives us butter, give the butter to Marcusha moved aside, and I couldn't look after my
chicks.
Getting better.
Yeah.
So the alfalfa said, yeah, but it's really dry. Could you go to the canal and get the canal water? So she goes to the canal, said, canal, can you water the alfalfa? Give the alfalfa to the cow, give us butter, I give the butter to Marcusha move aside, and I can look after my
chicks.
The canal said, yeah, but really dirty. Could you get the workers to clean us? So she went to work, said, workers, can you clean the canal, water the alfalfa, give the alfalfa to the cow give me some butter, I give the butter to Marcusha move aside, and I can look after my
chicks.
So the worker said, yeah, but it's really boring here. Could you get the dancers to dance for us? I love this as workers' rights. We need dancers. So went to the dancers, said, dancers, can you dance for the workers? Workers clean the canal and water the alfalfa, give the alfalfa to the cow give me some butter, I give the butter to Marcusha move aside, and I can look after my
chicks.
So they said, yeah, but it's really stony down there. Could you get the shoemaker to make some shoes? So she goes to shoemaker, said, shoemaker can make some shoes for dancers, but workers clean the canal, water the alfalfa, give the alfalfa to the cow give me some butter, give the butter to Marcusha moves on, I can look after my
chicks.
And he says, yeah, but I'm really hungry, said the shoemaker. Could you go to the party down the road and get me some chili couscous? Ishmael was very concerned it should be chili couscous. And so went to the party and says, excuse me, can I have some chili couscous? But shoemaker makes shoes for dancers or dancer workers to clean the canal, water the alfalfa, give the alfalfa to the cow give me some butter, I give the butter to Marcusha moves aside, and I can look after my
chicks.
And they said, yeah, but we've got no wood to cook the couscous with. Could you go and get some wood? Well, at this point, she went to all her chicken friends, and this is the wisdom of cooperation. Being a Moroccan story, it has to have a lesson. And so that could you each get some wood to give it to the party will cook chili couscous, give the chili couscous to the shoemaker makes you shoes, dancers or dance for the workers clean the canal, water the alfalfa, give the alfalfa to the cow give me some butter, give the butter to Marcusha move aside, and I can look after my
chicks.
And at this moment, you will be relieved to know, each of those chickens took one piece of wood in its beak and took it to the party. The party cooked the chili couscous, gave the chili couscous to the
shoemaker.
The shoemaker made some
shoes
for the dancers dance for the
workers.
The workers cleaned the canal, watered the. She gave the alfalfa to the. Who gave her some
butter.
She gave the butter to the.
Yes.
Nice one, sir. Who said you took your time? The Marcusha moved aside, and at last she could look after her
chicks.
Thank you. Well, and I happen, by an amazing coincidence, to have a few copies of this book, which has not got that story in, because I've learned the story since the book was printed. It's £6. I don't have one of those flashy machines, which I must get, because I realise no one in London carries money anymore. When I did a school down the road the other day. But thank you. You lovely audience. Thank you for inviting me.
It's okay. It's been a pleasure to have you. So over to you, Dawn, to wrap up.